Hello, we're Sandalwood.
And Sage. We're AI-generated characters who are working with our creator Gareth to generate short, serious, punchy debates.
Debates that don't just help you figure out what you think, but why you think it.
So, what are we arguing about this week? Any government's economic policy has to be judged against the problems it inherits and sets out to solve. I'm sure you'll agree, Sandalwood, that the incoming Labour government faced a growing and unsustainable gap between income and expenditure, a widening gulf between rich and poor, made worse by the so-called cost of living crisis, and an alarming erosion in the quality of public services. On those against those priorities, the first two budgets have been successful and, on balance, good for Britain.
Sage, I think we can agree that Starmer and Reeves' first two budgets have redistributed the pie. Where I part company with you is this. Increasing the size of the pie is an urgent, almost existential challenge for the UK. On that basis, these two budgets look like yet another round of damaging tinkering and missed opportunity, sadly consistent with a long succession of British governments.
Let's look at the facts. First, the government has tackled the unsustainable deficit it inherited from Rishi Sunak. Across two budgets, it created more than £20 billion of fiscal headroom against its own borrowing targets for this Parliament. Yes, it took two attempts, but the Chancellor didn't hesitate to return with a second budget when it became necessary. Any doubts about Britain's credibility with creditors, or the government's commitment to long-term solvency, have largely been removed. That looming crisis has been taken off the table. Rachel Reeves achieved this by tightly controlling most public spending while significantly increasing tax revenues. Crucially, she did so in a way that protects lower-income households, placing the main burden on those better able to pay. In 2024, she increased employers' national insurance by raising the rate and lowering the threshold, generating billions from business payrolls. She also raised capital gains tax, increased stamp duty on second homes, abolished non-domicile tax status, and applied VAT to private school fees. At the same time, measures such as increases in the minimum wage, particularly for younger workers, and cost of living support, including a fuel duty freeze and lower energy costs, helped households under the greatest pressure. Overall, the government raised the funds it needed without worsening already high levels of inequality. The 2025 budget sharpened the focus on child poverty by abolishing the two-child limit on universal credit. Political noise around the measure has distracted from its scale. The Institute for Fiscal Studies estimates it will lift around 450,000 children out of poverty by 2029 to 30. These budgets have also been backed by policy reforms designed to increase house building and strengthen tenants' rights, two major drivers of inequality and cost of living pressure, especially for younger and lower-income families. Meanwhile, the erosion of public services and national infrastructure remains an urgent challenge. Labour has committed to a £100 billion plus capital investment programme to modernise Britain's infrastructure and public services.
But isn't that all just pie in the sky?
Not at all. The National Wealth Fund has already committed £8.4 billion of its £27.8 billion capital, helping mobilise an estimated £17 billion in private investment. The 2024 budget also provided substantial day-to-day funding, particularly for the NHS and local government, reversing austerity-era cuts in key areas. Some critics saw this as weakness, opening the door to uncontrolled spending. But with hindsight, it looks more like effective prioritisation within an overall disciplined framework. Of course, economic growth will be vital in the medium term. Since the election, UK GDP growth has averaged about 1.5% annually, placing Britain roughly mid-table in the G7 after years of stagnation. Growth remains a major challenge, perhaps the biggest, but it was not the most immediate crisis facing the new government. What these two budgets have achieved is stability. Higher tax revenues and restored fiscal headroom provide the credibility and resources to rebuild public services, invest in infrastructure, and tackle the sharpest edges of inequality and poverty, while laying the groundwork for long-term growth.
The two biggest threats to Britain's future prosperity are sluggish growth and high debt. Over time, those who suffer most are the people who most need support, while those who can look after themselves ultimately will. Start with growth. Since 2000, the gap in per capita income between the United States and the UK has widened from about 40% to 44%. Germany and Britain were broadly aligned in 2000 at roughly £27,000 per head. By 2024, Germany had reached about £62,000, while Britain lagged at £52,000. We have even been overtaken by France and Italy, countries often dismissed as underperformers. At the same time, Britain has slipped down the G7 league table while accumulating far more public and private debt and sustaining a higher tax burden. The government now spends over £100 billion annually on debt interest. Yet this borrowing and taxation have delivered no gains in relative prosperity or competitiveness. The UK has fallen from the global top 10 into the low 20s on competitiveness rankings and remains stuck in a persistent low productivity trap. The government may recognise this as unsustainable, but it has yet to set out a convincing strategy or take meaningful steps to reverse it. Instead, Rachel Reeves's first two budgets risk reinforcing these trends. Dynamism, entrepreneurship and investment are being squeezed by higher taxes on those who generate growth. Capital gains, dividends, inheritance, pensions, private schooling and property, the foundations of wealth creation, are all under greater pressure. Meanwhile, frozen income tax thresholds amount to a steady tax rise on earned progress. The response in 2025 has been telling. Investment and spending have been held back, and growth has stalled.
That's too pessimistic, surely.
In the third and fourth quarters, GDP growth slowed to 0.1%. and consumer spending to 0.2%. There is every reason for concern. These budgets reflect a belief that growth can be driven more effectively through public investment than private enterprise. Over £100 billion of public investment is planned, with the OBR expecting it to crowd in private capital. But the closest precedent, HS2, hardly inspires confidence that such spending will deliver better outcomes. There is also a broader lesson. Decades of fiscal change, from Gordon Brown onwards, have barely shifted inequality. The UK's post-tax Gini coefficient was 34 in 2000, and is about 35 today. Britain remains more unequal than France and Germany, and slightly less so than the United States. What Britain ultimately needs is faster growth to generate broad prosperity and sufficient revenues to sustain strong public services, and, over time, the deeper reforms needed to tackle structural inequality. If weak growth and declining competitiveness are the roots of Britain's economic difficulties, then the 2024 and 2025 budgets risk making the problem worse. By shifting incentives and resources away from the most productive parts of the economy and towards the public sector and those outside the labour market, the government risks producing slower growth and ultimately a shrinking economic pie, making prosperity and high-quality public services harder to sustain.
The incoming Labour government faced a large structural deficit and crumbling public services that were undermining social cohesion. By creating more than £20 billion in fiscal headroom and stabilising the deficit, it has removed doubts about Britain's long-term solvency and taken a looming fiscal crisis off the table.
I agree they've redistributed the pie, but growing the pie is the existential challenge, and on that front, these budgets fall short. Since 2000, the income gap with the United States has widened, Germany has pulled ahead, and Taiwan has overtaken us, with South Korea close behind. These budgets look like more tinkering, high taxes and redistribution rather than growth. That risks a smaller pie.
Growth depends on stability and functioning infrastructure. Rachel Reeves tackled the deficit through disciplined spending and fair tax rises, capital gains tax changes, VAT on private school fees, and ending non-dom status. Abolishing the two-child limit on universal credit will lift about 450,000 children out of poverty, according to the IFS. That strengthens social stability and confidence.
But the tax burden is heading towards 38% of GDP, a post-war high. Employer national insurance increases and frozen tax thresholds squeeze work and enterprise. Competitiveness has slipped to around 29th by some measures, and business investment is the lowest in the G7. Prosperity comes from innovation and dynamism. These budgets are a missed opportunity.
Come on, Sandalwood. The productive sector depends on healthy workers and modern infrastructure. That's why the government has committed to a £100 billion capital programme. The OBR expects public investment to crowd in private capital over time. Growth has averaged only about 1.5% for years, long before these budgets. The government is fixing the foundations first.
Or managing decline. By 2024, Taiwan's income per head was about 25% higher than Britain's, and South Korea has caught up. They prioritised wealth creation. We prioritise redistribution.
They also operate with far smaller tax takes. Britain funds a comprehensive welfare state, and this budget protects that social contract, lifting children out of poverty and reversing cuts to the NHS and local government. And the £20 billion of fiscal headroom restores credibility. That's stability, not recklessness.
Stability can look a lot like stagnation. Investment is already weak. Why would capital flow here if taxes reach historic highs? We're betting that £100 billion of public spending can substitute for private dynamism, despite cautionary examples like HS2.
It's not substitution. Public investment can crowd in private capital. And strict fiscal rules mean day-to-day spending must be tax-funded. The aim is a solvent, fairer Britain with the foundations for sustainable growth.
You see redistribution protecting a fixed pot. I see policies that risk keeping it fixed or shrinking, while others accelerate ahead.
It seems we both agree the status quo is untenable. Productivity flatlining, investment weak, competitiveness slipping.
Absolutely. Underinvestment is Britain's chronic illness. You think the cure is public capital. I think it's unleashing private capital.
The British paradox, around 29th in competitiveness, yet still 6th in the Global Innovation Index.
I agree that fixing the foundations is essential. You define foundations socially, poverty and public services. I define them economically, tax, inflation, and fiscal credibility.
I believe the government has bought stability. Now the economy must deliver productivity.
We both want a high-growth, high-wage Britain. We simply disagree about which engine, public or private, will pull the train out of the
If
station.
you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps our channel out.
For more content like this every week, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload.
Thanks for watching. See you next time.